restless night descends upon a deserted rest stop, its silence disrupted only by the rustling leaves and far-off hum of traffic. Maurice Jordan, a distinguished black attorney with an unyielding resolve etched onto his tired face, pulls into the solitary parking space beneath flickering fluorescent lights. Exhaustion clings to him from endless hours of tireless advocacy, yet tonight, he desires nothing more than a brief respite before the final leg of his journey. His worn sedan, a testament to his underdog past and unassuming present, sits conspicuously amid the emptiness. No sooner does he step out for a breath of cool night air than the flashing red and blue lights shatter the fragile tranquility. Two officers emerge from their patrol car, their steps heavy with a preposterous authority. Officer Dean, grizzled and brimming with disdain, leads the charge with a sneer that encapsulates years of unchallenged prejudice. His partner, Officer Langley, young yet already molded by the same toxic ideals, strides alongside, mimicking a pit bull's readiness for confrontation. "Evening, sir. You mind telling us what you're doing here?" Officer Dean demands, his tone laced with unspoken accusation. Maurice meets their gaze levelly, his posture one of weary defiance. "Good evening, officers. Just stretching my legs before hitting the road again. That all right with you?" The barbed exchange is a dance Maurice knows well, but the beat remains jarring. For black men like him, innocence is never assumed, and dignity often comes at a price. Nonetheless, his heart races not with fear, but with a deep-seated anger that, like lava beneath the earth's crust, threatens to erupt if pushed too far. From behind the badge, Dean's eyes scan Maurice, searching for a reason to exert power unnecessarily, perceiving a threat that simply doesn't exist. "We've had reports of suspicious activity," he lies, his voice an iron fist, clothed in casual inquiry. Maurice's patience thins, and the air thickens with an unspoken challenge. "And yet here I am, just a tired traveler. Surely you have some actual criminal to pursue." The officer's lips curve into a crooked smile that never reaches his eyes. "We'll see about that. Driver's license and registration now." As Maurice complies, the tension solidifies, turning the space between them into a battlefield of presumed guilt against unwavering honor. There's a helplessness in being ensnared by the invisible chains of systemic prejudice, a realization that each question is a bar of that cage. The rapid shuffle of radio static precedes Langley's nod towards his partner, confirming the warrantless authority of their future actions. "Step out of the car, sir. We're going to need to search your vehicle," Officer Dean commands, wielding an autocratic justification. Maurice's heart skips a beat, a silent protest rising and falling on a sharp intake of breath. "On what grounds?" "Failure to comply can lead to your arrest." Dean's words claw at the night, dismissing Maurice's query with ease. There's an arcane ritual here of words turning into cuffs, compliance into captivity, all too familiar to men of Maurice's skin tone. The cuffs click shut behind him, heavy with injustice, as he's dealt the ever-perfected hand of systemic abuse. The glint of the metal is a painful reminder of chains long passed, but never truly cast off. Every silent cry against his dignity resonates with the memories of those who stood wrongly accused before him. As he's led to the squad car, neighbors from nearby homes peek through blinds cloaked with shadows of indifference or silent understanding. To them, it's another unsaid truth of being an outsider in a world built with brick walls fashioned from bias and ignorance. Maurice sits in the cold back seat, the smell of vinyl and neglect invading his senses. The feeling of powerlessness courses through his veins, a well-worn groove in his resilient soul. Yet there's a fire in his eyes, a promise of defiance simmering beneath the surface that goes unnoticed by his antagonists. One day they'll find out who Maurice Jordan truly is. A bearer of justice, not so easily shackled. As the night reclaims its otiose calm and his thoughts churn, the solemn night bird's cry echoes, the mournful song of the unjustly vilified, seeking the dawn of ironic reckoning that looms on the horizon. Maurice's mind drifts back, tracing the long, arduous path that carved him into the man he is today. in this very moment of ignominy. Born in a South Side Chicago neighborhood where opportunities were rare and life lessons harsh, Maurice's existence was painted with a palette of stark realities. His mother, a resolute woman with dreams larger than their cramped apartment, whispered hope into his life, urging him toward excellence amid a tapestry of struggles. "Baby, you ain't gotta become what they expect. You're destined for more," she often said, her voice as steadfast as the North Star. His early years were a relentless dance with adversity, dodging street violence, combating educational constraints, and combating casual racism that seeped languorously into everyday life. With each sneering slur and dismissive glance during his formative school days, Maurice vowed to forge a different destiny, one where he held the power to sculpt a world more just. Legal studies at a prestigious university became not just an escape but a battleground where intellectual duels replaced physical ones. Every classroom debate, every late-night reading session was another brick laid in the foundation of his determination. Memories of being the token participant in law school discussions lingered, the lone black voice in a chorus of privilege, navigating through ignorance wrapped in scholarly guise. "I don't see what's keeping a person of any race from attaining success if they just work hard enough," a peer had once challenged, his dismissive rhetoric stinging like a slap across Maurice's face. Maurice, gazing steadily into the eyes of indifference cloaked in naivete, countered with a measured authority that belied youth. "You talk of a race without handicaps, while we start 10 paces back with shackles around our legs," he'd replied, drawing nods and silence in equal measure. Graduation wasn't just a commencement, it was a declaration. Proudly stepping forth with a law degree clenched tightly in one hand and dreams unfurling in the other, Maurice was now armed to battle the invisible chains that had bound his community for generations. Despite the layers of prejudice, Maurice peeled back to stand in law firms where he was often mistaken for an assistant rather than a partner. He remained unyielding. His reputation burgeoned, marked by courtroom victories against those who underestimated him, and a reputation for championing the unfairly accused who shared his reflection. A pivotal case involving wrongful termination due to racial bias thrust him into the spotlight and planted the first seeds of his deep-seated antipathy towards authority figures who misused power. Maurice's fervent cross-examination shattered the defendant's facade, revealing the systemic decay beneath polished veneers. "Is it just the color of his skin? Or do you truly believe our Constitution has room for some more than others?" His voice had boomed through the courtroom, each word calculated to lance through the veils of bias. That moment marked a turning point, a defiantly raised fist against the oppressive status quo. Each victory in the courtroom was a shout against the silence trying to swallow voices like his, a call echoing through halls of justice, slowly bending towards equity. His judicial appointment followed, a culmination of years spent wading through a judicial system mired in inequity. As a judge, Maurice was both revered and reviled in equal measure. His presence in a bench long dominated by monochrome legacies, an affront to those who funded their privilege on the labor of silence. He fought tirelessly, pushing back against oppressive ordinances and archaic legal precedents. Despite the specter of retribution lurking in unseen corners, Maurice wore his badge of honorary distinction not as a symbol of power, but as a promise to vindicate those who'd been denied their rightful place under the sun of justice. And now, this unexpected arrest at a rest stop threatened to unravel the years of hard-won progress, testing his resolve. But Maurice knew this fight was his to own. The chains of injustice, however clamped around his wrists, couldn't silence the ardor in his heart. He had fought too long, too hard to allow two bigoted officers to reduce him to nothingness in the shadows of highways and ignorance. In the cold confines of the police car, Maurice's spirit rekindled. He knew that the road ahead would demand undeniable courage, yet his eyes remained fixed on the destination, where justice lay waiting, impartial and uncompromising, just like the man braced to claim it. The charges leveled were as fabricated as the officer's sense of righteousness: trespassing and resisting arrest. Preposterous on official documents, but powerful enough to legitimize an unwarranted night behind bars. Yet, with Maurice's formidable cachet within the legal fraternity, the news of his arrest ignited a firestorm across professional and social networks like a match to dry kindling. The sun rose on a city unaware of the upheaval gestating in its midst, but within select circles, whispers ran like rivulets converging into a furious stream. Texts were exchanged with feverish haste, calls zigzagging with an urgency akin to wartime maneuvers. His colleagues, fiercely loyal and as diverse as his aspirations themselves, mobilized in a coordinated counterattack against the outrageous allegation. "Are you serious? Arrested at a rest stop? We'll get your case dropped within hours, and heads will roll," his confidant Leah Rivers, a dauntless attorney and one of the sharpest legal minds of their generation, vowed through a phone call as his legal team gathered at her office the following dawn. A meeting convened in Leah's sleek modern conference room, marred with the palpable mix of incredulity and righteous anger. Lawyers with furrowed brows and resolute eyes pored over documents, plans of attack whispering in tones that demanded swift and unequivocal action. Meanwhile, the outside world, a patchwork of allies, critics, and idle spectators, buzzed with apprehension and anticipation. Beneath the surface of patient professionalism lay a raw edge, a demand for accountability that threatened to swell into a tidal wave if sated desires for justice went unmet. The legal apparatus set in motion was as intricate as it was relentless. Motions drafted to dismiss, press releases issued, and calls made at the highest levels of city governance. The web of professional connections Maurice had woven over the years, a testament to his relentless motion forward, now served as an anchor against the current of injustice threatening to drag him under. Amid this professional battleground, the community's pulse rallied, fueled by social media's omnipresent scrutiny. Declarations of solidarity poured forth on digital platforms, the faces of men and women of varying hues coalescing into a tapestry of resilience that spread far beyond geographical boundaries. A movement ignited, not just for Maurice, but for every voice stifled, every liberty encroached upon. Yet, the noise of public outcry was punctuated by the gears of bureaucracy turning with deliberate precision. Within law enforcement's corridors, the arrest set off quiet discussions in administrative loci, questions asked not of Maurice's guilt, but of potential backlash and repercussions that could tarnish badges and careers. Would their own blue wall shield them, or collapse under the weight of their own prejudice? A pivotal figure emerged, a city prosecutor sympathetic to Maurice's cause and with political aspirations tied to changing community perceptions. Her statement reflected not only the procedural missteps of the arresting officers, but also voiced thinly veiled criticism of the status quo. Actions such as these undermine the trust and respect essential to our justice system. With each word carefully chosen, she fanned the flames of systemic introspection, her strategic maneuvering a deft reply to a world watching, waiting. In parallel, Maurice's professional allies drew upon clandestine legal intelligence, revealing threads of misconduct and discrimination that painted the arrest not as an isolated incident, but a sordid component of broader police malfeasance. Patterns swept beneath bureaucratic rugs were soon to be aired in the fresh light of judicial oversight. The city reeled with frenzied anticipation, the scales of justice trembling under intense scrutiny. What began as a deceitful arrest now swirled into a vortex of systemic review, a chain reaction fueled by the audacity to challenge long-held assumptions and the demand for equitable treatment. Charges dropped with due speed, but the action wasn't merely a legal triumph. It cracked a window into the soul of a city, the anticipation of something greater about to burst forth with irrepressible force. Maurice, now unbound not just physically but from the chains of baseless accusation, prepared for the next steps in a larger fight, this time with the weight of an entire community's hopes and allies at his back. The stage was set not merely for return, but for a reckoning upon a system long overdue for change, setting in motion repercussions far beyond anyone's initial imagining. The courtroom was a paradox of solemnity and electric anticipation. The day Maurice Jordan, now free and cloaked once more in the austere robes of judicial authority, ascended to the bench. His reputation as a formidable justice was known to many, yet incredulity reigned, as whispers of his prior humiliation skittered like restless leaves through the gallery. Today, another chapter in his unyielding quest for justice was poised to unfold, one where the scales tipped not by bias, but by the weight of truth itself. Maurice took his seat, his gaze sweeping over the courtroom. The air was heavy with expectation, thick with a tension that demanded form and release. Yet, within his depths, Maurice found clarity, a purpose that cut through the noise like a knife through fog. Today he would preside not merely over any case. He was to judge the actions of those very officers who had sought to diminish him. "I stand before you not as a symbol of what you've done, but who you ought to be held accountable to," he would later say. But the resolution of that sentiment already seared within him now, whispering a defiant truth. Justice can be blind, but it is never unseeing. Around him, the courtroom filled with observers who wore emotions plainly, reassurance in allies' eyes, skepticism etched into doubtful expressions, and resentment subtly cloaked by silence from a few sullied badges lurking at the back. The gallery brimmed over with reporters, their pens poised, hungry for dramas and declarations. Yet here, in this moment of historical confluence, the power lay not with them, but with the man calmly resting his gavel on the mahogany bench. A symbol not of mere authority, but the embodiment of hard-fought legitimacy. As proceedings commenced, the public reveal of Maurice's true identity sent ripples through the ranks of audience and accused alike. There was a quiet inevitability in the way Officer Dean and Officer Langley were brought forth as defendants, their expressions hard yet crumbling, the weight of irony pressed upon their shoulders like stones. Their defense attorneys rose, seeking to dismantle the judge's veneer of authority, carving at intent and impartiality with the precision of a craftsman's chisel. "Your Honor, we question whether an individual with such a personal stake can fairly preside over a case against those by whom he was wronged," voiced Attorney Stevens, his tone dripping with calculated skepticism. If fairness were truly at stake, one might argue those who wielded power unjustly should never deem to question the balance now sought in its wake, Maurice replied, his voice imbued with controlled might, a symphony of resilience. The gallery thrummed with muted affirmation as murmurs of agreement swayed back and forth like a chorus line resonating against courtroom walls. But for Maurice, the trial wasn't merely about professional reparations or spectators nodding approval. Each moment unfolded like a stepping stone over an abyss of disillusionment and toward a promised land of reparation. Evidence laid bare, testimonies revealed, as vial after vial of misconduct dripped, staining the veneer of honorable service painted upon the accused officers' lives. Yet even as they withstood the exposure, Maurice sensed the pulse of something greater building, a movement beyond his individual story. Here, judgment wasn't the destination, merely one station in a broader journey toward acknowledgement, reckoning, and ultimately a society willing to redefine its principles and its players. It was with that knowledge he wielded his gavel, drawing the tapestry of tensions tighter toward resolution. "I aim not for vengeance, but envision something more profound, to spark the candle flame of change within these hallowed halls," he declared, each measured word a promise engraved into the mortar of justice and equity. The room breathed in unison, poised on the precipice of transformation. Maurice's journey had become its own meditation, a journey of courage and conviction as unyielding as the truth he sought to uphold. In his heart lay an irrepressible flame kindled long ago among the dreams of possibility and freedom, re-illuminated in every act of defiance, every challenge overcome. For now, the scales were his, a tremendous weight of not just law, but legacy laid upon them, a legacy retold through verdicts yet to come. The clamor of the courtroom fell still, awaiting his hand to sound judgment's decisive chime. Amid silence, a community listened, a city waited, a nation watched, each breath held for a future suspended on the power of lived experience and the resolve of one ardent heart. The familiar air of authority coiled behind Maurice Jordan's eyes as he prepared to address the court. The roles were now reversed for the officers who once subjected him to unnecessary degradation, and the gravity of the moment was palpable, both a victory for personal dignity and a black mark upon the justice system which had so often faltered in its promise of fairness. Officer Dean and Officer Langley stood accused, their prior smugness now tempered by the reality of Maurice's unwavering presence at the bench. The two wore anxiety thinly veiled behind masks of defiance, their trust in the blue wall less certain than it had been the night they'd wielded their authority without cause. The courtroom was filled to capacity, a convergence of lawyers, journalists, and citizens drawn by the pull of a narrative that embodied more than a singular act of racism, but a systemic reflection. Murmuring ceased as Maurice began to speak, his voice resonant as he articulated universal truths. "You stand here today as not merely defendants," Maurice addressed, his words cutting through the silence like a blade, precise and deliberate. "This case is a measure of our society's spine, the courage to confront uncomfortable truths, and act not in defense of the indefensible, but to uphold a standard worthy of the trust placed in us by the public." Officer Dean shifted uneasily on his feet. His previously wrought self-assurance had been chipped away over proceedings that had laid bare his and Langley's contempt for the badge they supposedly honored. Dean's lawyer, pressing forward, attempted to claw back ground, his criticisms aimed with sharp specificity at the heart of Maurice's impartiality. "Your Honor, I question your ability to separate emotion from justice," the defense attorney ventured, his words laced with challenge. Maurice remained unwavering, a lone figure clad in the authority of justice that could only be earned, not bestowed. "I assure you, Mr. Stevens, impartiality has not wavered here. Emotion is the lens through which humanity peers, yet justice is blind to everything but truth. Let me make this clear. In this courtroom, truth is sovereign." A pause, brief yet commanding, underscored the sincerity behind his declaration. Gasps from the gallery signaled collective recognition. Maurice's refusal to be cowed by underhand tactics resonated, further fortifying him against the storm of skepticism swirling within and outside the courthouse walls. Maurice's courtroom bore witness to detailed recounts, the nighttime altercation, the falsified reports, and the witnesses stepping into light with courage. Each narrative became a thread, stories spun into a tapestry that revealed systemic rot, while highlighting the urgent need for accountability. "We are not simply here due to a wrong committed against one man," Maurice continued, eyes surveying the room, gauging the impact of each word as though laying stones across a river. "This case represents countless silenced voices, and reveals that justice denied anywhere diminishes respect for law and order everywhere." It was a declaration not solely of Maurice's victory, a triumph over personal discredit, but a rallying cry for systemic introspection and reform. Each face he encountered in the gallery echoed a unified yearning for change, injecting every statement he made with an urgency that words alone struggled to convey. Officer Langley, caught in the quagmire of his own choices, dared a glance toward Maurice. Infamy clung to him, and Maurice caught the flicker of something approaching contrition in his eyes. Yet remorse and hindsight could not rewrite history, nor erase the ledgered wrongs carefully documented over weeks of trial. As the day progressed, Maurice held a firm hand on proceedings, not merely conducting a trial, but orchestrating a dynamic declaration within the halls of justice. In those tense moments, he balanced chaos with clarity, wielding judgment with a steady hand, while voices both for and against battled beyond courtroom walls. Maurice leaned forward, offering his final observations to the court with a decisiveness that left no room for ambiguity. This trial takes a step toward restoring faith in our institutions, a reminder that we must consistently strive for fairness not in the abstract, but as lived reality for all citizens. The gallery absorbed this, the collective awareness growing of the change that lay upon them like morning dew, a precarious beauty underscored by fragility, urgently prompting care and due diligence. As the proceedings concluded, Maurice allowed himself a brief glance into the distance, as if envisioning the long road still unfurling, not as a solitary path, but as an ever-widening avenue for an emboldened society striving towards an inclusive truth. In his heart, Maurice carried hope, tempered yet unfaltering, a lighthouse in the tempestuous night, illuminating the way forward. He was just one man amidst a continuum of struggle and triumph, his resolve a beacon for countless others, each heartbeat a testament to an unshakable spirit forged in the flames of relentless adversity. As the courtroom filled with anticipation, Maurice Jordan took a measured breath, grounding himself amid the swirling tension. He was acutely aware that today would put his resolve, and the law itself, to the test. The defense's challenge to his impartiality had been artful, yet Maurice stood, an unyielding pillar of fairness, his eyes reflecting a mind sharp as tempered steel. The lead defense attorney, Stevens, prowled forward, ready to cast doubt like shadows. "Gentlemen and ladies of the jury," he began, his voice honeyed yet razor-edged, "we gather under extraordinary circumstances. A man who was once a victim of presumed misconduct now sits as the judge upon those very accused of it." His words hung heavily, designed to sow skepticism amongst the jurors like seeds of discord. Maurice, unwavering, poised himself, knowing that every moment within this legal theater required the deftness of a scalpel to separate truth from theatricality. Leaning forward, Stevens continued, "One might question how such a scenario can yield unbiased justice. I implore you to consider whether your judgments, and indeed the judgments of this court, are influenced by masterful storytelling rather than cold, hard facts." Maurice's heart remained steady, his response a calm sea shielded from turbulence. "Mr. Stevens," Maurice interjected, his voice wrapping the room in gravitas, "this court relies on evidenced reality, not fabricated narratives. We are here to dissect actions and intent, not labor in the field of speculative what-ifs." There was a power in his words, a weight that tamped down the defense's implication of a biased hand at justice's scale. Eyes in the courtroom flickered between the opposing parties like a tightly spun pendulum, tension coiling and shifting in the air. Officer Dean, the elder of the accused, shifted, uneasy beneath the scrutiny. He whispered to Langley, his junior partner, "They'll hang us out, rookie, you mark my words," his bravado slipping into a quiet sneer as they exchanged glances, fraught with unspoken fears. "Sir, you did bring this on us," Langley murmured, his voice carrying a hint of youthful regret, laced with the burgeoning awareness that empathy might just be the force unraveling the prejudiced fabric of their decisions. As the prosecution team presented their case, they painted a meticulous picture of the officer's actions, interweaving a narrative constructed with evidence and testimonies that laid the groundwork for understanding systemic abuse. Witnesses stepped forward, recounting interactions with the defendants, each tale weaving a collective mural of discrimination and misuse of power that defied singular redemption. Maurice listened intently. Each piece of evidence added yet another stroke to an unsettling mosaic. The prosecuted events were more than isolated mistakes. They were symptomatic of a wider malaise, no longer defensible under the guise of a rogue act within a trusted system. The defense attempted to counter, fervently spotlighting procedural errors, playing to the gallery's fatigue with legal minutiae. Yet, Maurice's sharp focus ensured they gained no traction, a testament to his stewardship over proceedings that bent not under manipulative weights. The turning point arrived unassumingly but with the force of a revelation. A digital trail brought to light by the prosecution revealed damning correspondences between the officers, messages exchanged in casual endorsement of excessive force and racial profiling techniques, shattering the defense's fragile veneer. "Is this not a portrayal of entrenched bigotry laid bare before us?" the prosecutor inquired, turning toward the jury, their collective gaze now fixated upon the accused officers. Designed to sow reasonable doubt, the defense's strategy faltered under the meticulous exposure of their clients' truths. The gallery, witnessing this unraveling, murmured reactions that ebbed and flowed, a tide signaling inevitable understanding. The jury, tasked with deliberation, bore into Maurice a gravitas likewise matched in their shoulders, pragmatic, earnest, evidence-led. Already they stood poised to usher in justice, not merely retribution, but a pivot towards a paradigm where transparency supplanted secrecy and fairness trumped favor. In those final moments of the day's proceedings, Maurice closed his eyes briefly, drawing strength from the conviction that enveloped him, shielding him against attempts at discreditation. This was not merely a professional juncture, it was a personal pilgrimage, a crucible within which integrity commanded not just his path forward, but future paths yet uncharted for all who dared to seek them. The courtroom, suspended between absolution and accountability, prepared to close its chapter for the day. Yet, Maurice knew, as they adjourned, that the weight of this trial and its eventual conclusions would reverberate far beyond these walls, a symphony constructed not on the echoes of a singular case, but on the aspirations of a society demanding healing and humanity in equal measure. The courtroom's harsh fluorescent lights gave way to the softer hues of dusk as Maurice finally stepped outside, the city skyline stretching out like a jagged silhouette against the impending night. Exhaustion tugged at his limbs, but the weight of memory bore heavier, pulling him back to moments that shaped his relentless advocacy. It wasn't the first time he'd faced oppressive authority. In his youth, the hard edges of systemic racism were not obscured by the sheen of respectability politics or urban mythologizing. They were raw, visceral experiences that colored his world in stark black and white. The recollections came unbidden, as they often did after battles waged in defense of his dignity. He was 16 again, a gangly teenager walking home from after-school tutoring, a hopeful pocketbook of SAT flashcards his constant companion. The path he trekked was lined with shadows that blended into familiar nightmares, a scrimmage with the blues and reds of police cars, screams and taunts echoing through restless alleyways. One particular night stood out, crisp in memory, like the early bite of autumn in Chicago. He'd passed by Baxter Park when the officers arrived, as sudden as an ambush in a movie scene, red-faced and haughty in arrogance. Their disdain was not masked by tolerance or law. Their words were blunt instruments, designed to affirm their authority while negating Maurice's humanity. "Where you off to, boy?" The question rang sharply, securing Maurice's attention. The memory had morphed over time, not of what he said, but of how quickly silence had fallen, a hollow echo in a scandalous void. It had been a frisk, humiliating, every demand boxed in as lawful, every glance saturated with the presumption of guilt. No citations, no cause, just a 20-minute reminder that borders were drawn along color lines he couldn't erase. His voice was found after what felt like hours, tethered to a whisper of defiance he'd wrenched free from the roots of his being. "Isn't there real crime to fight?" His young voice trembled then, yes, but it didn't break, even under the gaze of intimidation. The blood-pounding fear that perfumed the air that day had matured into an unwavering resolve. He pledged then and there to rise above the attempts to cut him down, to transform every arrest into an argument for change, every dehumanizing encounter into emboldened empathy. Time had calcified his conviction but hadn't worn it down. Every case he'd argued, every brief he'd filed, rode upon a promise made to his younger self, to confront, to engage, and ultimately to reform. Maurice's phone buzzed, pulling him from reminiscence to reality. A reminder from Leah, highlighting a community gathering at the courthouse steps that evening. She knew him well enough to understand he'd make an appearance. The past demanded a reckoning, and a reckoning required presence. As he wound his way through the courthouse's plaza, his anticipation matching the city's electric undercurrent, Maurice reflected on his path carved through the bedrock of racial tension. He was a living contradiction, an aspirant descended from generations of struggle, an architect of law who recast each unfairly cast stone back into the Kremlin of justice. He reached the steps, illuminated by scattered light but heavy with purpose, to be met by a mix of familiar faces and new supporters. Leah gestured him forward, her smile a curve of resilience shared between comrades in arms. Maurice took a moment, glancing across the assembly of spirited individuals whose lives intersected his, with stories equally vital and hard-won. "Thank you all for coming," Maurice commenced, his voice steady and clear, but powered by depth. "This moment, standing here with you, isn't simply about what happens inside courtroom walls. This is about standing together to demand and create a justice that recognizes equality at its core." His words were met with nods and murmurs of agreement, the crowd's energy tangible. Maurice continued, aware of the importance of this moment not just for him but for all gathered, their past pains transformed into strength. "We transform our history by acknowledging it," he affirmed, his eyes drawing a line across each face, capturing their collective anguish and aspirations. "Our goal, our necessity, is to shift paradigms, reshape the narrative so that those who come after us walk better paths, unhindered by shadows we've fought to dispel." A cheer rooted in solidarity erupted, his words embraced as collective echoes through the dusky twilight. Maurice smiled, letting the warmth of the shared mission fill the spaces between them. The journey ahead would be arduous, confronting deep-rooted establishment and cautious tradition, but Maurice's resolve was nothing if not resilient. In every step forward lay the whisper of his past victories and the roar of victories yet to come, a future propelled unceasingly by the gravity of change and the irrepressible certainty of justice. The following morning, the courthouse was a hive of activity, bustling with attorneys, staff, and members of the press, all buzzing with the electric potential of the day's proceedings. Word of Maurice's case and the officers on trial had spread beyond local borders, enveloping the city in an aura of anticipation and unease. It was more than a court case. It was a crucible in which the public sentiment of an entire community was being forged. As Maurice entered the courthouse, he felt the weight of expectant eyes upon him. Reporters lingered near stairwells and shadowed corridors, their cameras clicking like rapid pulses in the morning air. Protesters gathered outside, a tapestry of faces diverse in age and background but unified in purpose. The rhythmic chant of their demands for justice and reform was a beat that synchronized with the beat of Maurice's heart. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was equally charged. Familiar faces from the community filled the spectators' seats, alongside journalists and those who found themselves caught up in the tide of history in the making. As proceedings began, murmurs of excitement and anxiety rippled through the crowd, a testament to the gravity of the trial. Maurice prepared for the day's hearings, aware that today, perhaps more than any other, would be pivotal in the narrative of his fight against systemic injustice. The courtroom silenced as he took his seat at the bench, a commanding presence, yet a symbol of vulnerable humanity striving for a greater good. As the case reconvened, the prosecution intensified its focus on evidence of past misconduct perpetrated under the officer's watch. Videos discovered on social media depicted routine abuses of authority, body cam footage from unrelated incidents that both disturbed and galvanized public opinion, depicting not isolated acts, but attributes of corrosive culture within the precinct. Maurice navigated the proceedings with careful neutrality, his questions probing yet balanced, as he guided the narrative toward clarity without veering into personal vendetta. Each query was a scalpel, designed to meticulously excise truth from the tangled web of prejudice and deceit layered over the years. As more testimonies were given, a shift occurred within the gallery, heightened awareness morphing into tangible tension. Community leaders had gathered in silent rows, each representing different neighborhoods and backgrounds, embodying the diverse support that had coalesced around Maurice's cause. During a recess, Maurice took a moment to speak directly with community members, a practice he'd upheld throughout the trial as a testament to transparency and solidarity. Clustered within a sunlit corner of the courthouse, these conversations were as much about the trial specifics as they were about broader systemic change long overdue. "Judge Jordan, we're here because your fight is our fight too," noted Angela Chang, a renowned activist whose voice carried weight across the city. "We're counting on justice not just today, but as a beacon moving forward. What happens here in these walls must echo throughout our neighborhood streets." Maurice listened intently, nodding, fully aware that the promise held in the outcome transcended the courtroom. "I appreciate your unwavering presence and advocacy," he replied, sincerity woven into his words. "This is not just about winning a case, it's about changing the narrative." Elsewhere, tensions mounted, and protests outside the courthouse grew louder, echoing through chambers. It was not the chaos of disorder, but the harmony of a shared plea for recognition and reform. The sound waves crashed through institutional stoicism, demanding action, demanding an acknowledgement louder than mere rhetoric. Back in session, defense attempts to redirect the narrative onto individual motivations of retaliation fell flat, unable to erode the judge's determination or the community's collective coherence. Evidence continued to unfurl, each piece adding impetus, resonating both within the court and beyond stone walls. In their defense, the officers could muster only silence that backed into uneasy admissions, nods toward deeper culpability, masked by procedural bravado. Maurice's voice rose with authority as the day drew to a close, a crescendo, merging law and justice inextricably. This case isn't simply a matter of individual accountability. It's a clarion call for systemic reform. We stand at the precipice of realignment. I ask everyone here to remember our responsibility to usher in a justice that is equitable and enduring. The resonance of his words lingered long after he lowered his gavel, a powerful punctuation to a day charged with purpose. As the gathering dispersed into the afternoon light, Maurice recognized the work left unfinished. Yet in the courthouse's fading echoes there was a promise fulfilled. The promise that voices, once subdued in the shadows of marginalization, found their strength in unity and in law, standing unbowed for what was to come. As the afternoon sun leaned lazily across the sky, casting long shadows through the leafy suburbs, Maurice Jordan found himself welcoming a rare moment of stillness. The courtroom battles had been fierce, and their reverberations continued to pulse through the city. Yet, amid the legal maneuvers and public demonstrations, it was his family who provided the sanctuary he craved, an anchor tethering him to the world beyond the court's brink. He arrived home to the familiar sounds and smells that spoke of warmth and comfort. His wife, Camille, had just returned from her own demanding day at the biology lab, her passion for scientific inquiry paralleling Maurice's own for justice. As Maurice walked through the door, the aroma of her famous jambalaya wrapped around him like a favored embrace. Their home, though modest, was a haven, filled with evidence of their shared journey. Photographs adorned the walls, capturing moments of triumph and laughter against the backdrop of a world not always kind. It was a paradox, this cocoon of love enveloped by the tempest of public life. "Welcome home, champion," Camille greeted, her smile a balm for his weary spirit. Her voice, always a melody of encouragement, lifted him from his thoughts and into the comfort of their shared togetherness. Maurice took her in his arms, the weight of the day slipping away. "Feels good to be back," he said, his voice softened by gratitude and love. Camille pulled back slightly, her eyes searching his face. "How's it going?" "Really?" she pressed, knowing intuitively that beneath his confident exterior, there lay the shifting currents of doubt and resolve. "It's a battle, Camille. A necessary one," Maurice mused, drawing strength from the solidarity they'd nurtured over the years. But it's more than just the courtroom. It's a stand we're taking together. This family, this community. She nodded, understanding, piercing any pretense of stoic certainty. You're carrying a lot on your shoulders. We all are. But remember, we stand with you, she reassured, a vow planted in the soil of their everyday lives, watered by brief moments like these. As they prepared dinner together, their conversation flowed into laughter and stories, weaving a tapestry of past joys and shared dreams. Yet, within the silences, there lingered the unspoken awareness of what lay ahead, the fervent hope for justice, balanced by the enormity of the struggle. Later, as their children, Joshua and Maya, joined them at the table, the mild chaos of family life breathed life into the evening. Maya, ever the inquisitive 12-year-old, fixed her gaze on her father. "Dad, I saw you on the news this morning. Are you winning?" Morris paused, choosing his words with care. "Winning isn't a finish line, love. It's about making sure those who feel voiceless are heard and showing that fairness is real, not just words." Joshua, a teenager wise beyond his 15 years, listened intently, his brimming curiosity mirroring his sister's. "Does it change things, though? Like, really change them for the better?" Maurice smiled, his heart swelling with the enormity of their curiosity and innocence, reminders of the world he hoped to leave them. "That's the plan, kiddo," Maurice reassured. "Bit by bit, case by case, we're building something new." The dinner conversation drifted into lighter topics, the banter of sibling rivalry, shared stories and dreams unfurling within the space that only family can shape. Each word, each shared glance across the table reinforced Maurice's mission, underpinning it with the solemn joy only family can bring. As night draped a gentle curtain over their home, Maurice stood at his children's bedroom doors, each softly breathing in the embrace of sleep, a testament to a future undetermined but bursting with potential. In those quiet moments before sleep claimed his own weary body, Maurice sat by the window, tracing the stars that arched with grace across the night sky. The world held its breath beyond their front door, a city poised between disruption and healing. With Camille's gentle presence beside him, Maurice carried the resolve of his family with him into the night, a reminder that every courtroom battle, every personal sacrifice, was a brick laid in the foundation of progress and promise for those who would follow. Rest came delicately, a whisper woven from the day's events and tomorrow's uncertainties. Yet, as slumber's gentle tide pulled him under, hope lingered. Its fervent whisper carried on the wind, echoing through the chambers of his heart and the streets of a city waking up to the dawn of change. As dawn painted the sky with hues of orange and pink, Officer Nathan Dean sat in his dimly lit kitchen, the morning paper splayed across the table like an accusations laid bare. The familiar sting of caffeine coursed through veins, still jittery with unease. His family's home, typically a refuge from the tumult of work and the world's judgment, now reflected the turmoil of a man grappling with his own sense of morality. A choked silence hovered over breakfast as his wife Elise shuffled quietly about the room, her movements careful, avoiding conversation that might lead into tense alleys of blame or justification. Their children, unaware of the growing shadows, clattered bowls and cereal, mundane sounds that in another context might be comforting. Nathan's eyes drifted over the headline that demanded attention. "Officers stand trial. A city awaits." The story beneath, written in unforgiving black and white, cut through pretenses, unraveling years of unchallenged conduct, his name now synonymous with abuse of power. It had started innocently enough. Nathan joined the force riding a wave of youthful idealism, determined to be an agent of change within the community he'd grown up in. But ideals, he'd discovered, have a way of tarnishing over time, each encounter with endemic prejudice coating them in layers of despair and complicity. Tools of the trade, once noble, had turned into instruments of rote enforcement, devoid of empathy, each decision justified by expedience, each routine stop woven into the fabric of authority until, one day, it unraveled with a single irrevocable act. Here Nathan sat, struggling against the ghosts of his choices, the rationalizations now insufficient shields against the tide washing over his conscience. As noise from the children faded into echoes dimly remembered, Elise broke the brittle quiet with thin-edged words. "Nathan, we can't go on skidding this elephant in the room," she began, her voice tinged with a weary determination born of love and frustration entwined. "What are we supposed to tell them? What have you told yourself?" The air between them was charged, his frustration masking a vulnerability he found impossible to abandon. "What do you want me to say, Elise?" he replied, struggling to keep bitterness at bay. "I want the truth, not just for us or the kids, but for yourself." Her demand was a plea that cut through his defenses, exposing the raw wound beneath. "Have you forgotten why you started doing this job?" Her question clawed at the very foundations of his being, a seismic reverberation loosening the edifice of his carefully constructed rationales. Memories of ideals once held dear came flooding in, of Nathan as a child playing pretend with a badge, promising justice and integrity. Across from him, Elise's eyes bore the weight of the truth they both feared. He wanted to explain it away, to rationalize actions as consequences of systemic issues beyond his control, but he knew, deep down, that such defenses were a forest made of smoke and mirrors. He sighed deeply, pressing palms against his temples as if to push away the oncoming tide. "I didn't want this. It wasn't supposed to be like this, but out there, it's different. It doesn't have to be," Elise insisted, the quiet strength in her voice steel-clad with conviction. "You've got choices, Nathan. More than those who've suffered. You can own what's happened, and maybe help make it right." In that moment, the truth felt like a cold wind slicing through the layers of guilt and defense. Nathan realized that redemption lay not in awaiting absolution, but stepping into the light of accountability. He exhaled slowly, a prelude to a decision brewing within. A difficult path toward acknowledgement. "I want to make it right. For them, for us," he admitted, hearing the unfamiliar fragility his voice possessed. Their eyes met, and in the shared moment of understanding lay a fragile hope, woven from threads of compassion and remorse. Elise squeezed his hand, a silent message of solidarity and expectation. The road to redemption, though fraught and uncertain, had begun to unfurl before him, a path toward reclaiming himself. Just then, the children burst back into the kitchen, their laughter muskets scattering the tension. Nathan watched them, realizing the importance of a legacy unmarred by shadows, and would fight to reshape a future worthy of their bright innocence. Later that day, he stood before the precinct's imposing walls, a bastion of duty now tinged with the poignancy of reflection. He knew the confrontation within the courtroom awaited him, but Nathan was ready to bear truth's weight and forge a new path amidst the rubble of his past, one deliberate step at a time. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as Nathan Dean took the stand, the solemn oath feeling weightier than any badge he'd ever worn. The eyes of the city bore down on him, an audience demanding narrative clarity and moral revelation. He was aware that his words could either fortify walls of mistrust or begin to dismantle the fortress of inequality brick. Officer Langley watched from the defense table, straining against the grips of his own burgeoning accountability. Nathan's testimony was meant to shield them both, a coordinated front issued by their defense. Yet Nathan had risen that morning with a resolute course charted within him, a compass pointing unwaveringly toward truth. "State your name, for the record, please," the prosecutor prompted, her voice a balanced amalgam of patience and probing intellect. "Nathan Dean," he replied, the familiar sound echoing through unfamiliar terrain, a man navigating the topography of confession. Nathan's hands were steady, a contrast to the disquiet once etched in his movements. He scanned the room, the row of jurors dangling on every nuanced syllable, the community members gathered in watchful observation, and finally, Judge Maurice Jordan, who sat impassive yet attentive, at the bench. "Officer Dean, can you recount the events of the night in question?" The prosecutor's inquiry was an impetus, urging him over the precipice of personal reckoning. He inhaled deeply, and the courtroom braced for his response. That night was supposed to be routine. A simple patrol turned into something it shouldn't have. "We'd been told to keep an eye out for suspicious activity around rest stops," he started. The script, provided pre-trial, drifting like smoke through his mind. His rehearsed narrative felt like wearing another's suit, a constriction of purpose against flesh yearning for genuine expression. Moments hung suspended as Nathan wavered on the brink of conformity and catharsis. "What happened at the rest stop?" the prosecutor pressed, her line precise, cutting through subterfuge toward clarity. Nathan glanced at Langley, whose countenance projected expectation tinged with trepidation. He understood then that this was not just his own redemption on the line, but a chance to forge a ripple extending far beyond himself. Nathan turned his focus back to the prosecutor, determination set like steel behind his gaze. "We stopped him without real cause. It was wrong," Nathan confessed, each word an iron-bound link severing years of institutional excuses. I profiled him, not because he was doing anything wrong, but because of the color of his skin." The confession, raw and potent as wildfire, spread through the courtroom. Gasping murmurs collided with an air thickened by the density of collective shock and revelation. Langley shifted, visibly agitated by Nathan's deviation from their mutual defense. Judge Jordan maintained a facade of measured control, yet within the balance of law and moral imperative, Maurice glimpsed a semblance of the justice he'd championed for. The prosecutor's eyes reflected a similar combination of surprise and appreciation, though her tone remained steady. "Officer Dean, are you saying that Maurice Jordan's arrest was without cause?" Nathan nodded, the weight lightened from his shoulders by the confirmation. "Yes, his arrest had no legitimate basis, and that was part of a broader, abusive pattern condoned by those who should have known better." Langley's frustration soured into resignation, and Nathan saw past the veneer of disappointment to the flicker of realization that perhaps, even against official advice, they could reclaim their integrity through owning their actions. The prosecutor, sensing opportunity, pressed for impact. "Why admit this now? Why not maintain the defense you prepared?" Nathan found no safety in artifice worth more than truth. "Because I'm tired of doing things the wrong way. This isn't about saving my skin. It's about righting a wrong that's festered too long." A ripple of respect and empathy flowed through the space around him. The courtroom, a place often deemed cold by the insulation of procedure, warmed under the glow of accountability palpably acknowledged. Nathan turned to Maurice, their eyes meeting, a moment devoid of antagonism, but carrying the weight of apology without need for spoken exchange. In that glance, Maurice found not absolution, but hope, a belief that change, if genuine, could stir even from the heart of wrongdoing. As the proceedings continued, Nathan realized that each word spoken, each truth unveiled, built bridges where once lay only chasms of mistrust and anger. In revealing the inadequacies within himself, Nathan set forth a truth tide strong enough not only to cleanse his tarnished reflection, but to fortify young lenses through which the perception of justice must inevitably be shaped anew. The day drew toward conclusion, yet the climb toward reconciliation had only begun. Nathan's journey toward redemption echoed softly, heralding a newfound commitment to justice that reached far beyond the walls of the courthouse, a legacy that, once taken root, might finally insist on reshaping the very landscape of righteousness itself. The courtroom's atmosphere had subtly shifted after Nathan's forthright confession. An electric tension persisted, illuminating the space between what had been and what was yet possible. The trial was far from over, yet the stark truth Nathan had shared served as a catalyst, awakening new avenues for justice within every listener's consciousness. Amid the proceedings, an unexpected development arose, a pivotal juncture bringing forth unforeseen allies in Maurice Jordan's quest for accountability. While Nathan's revelation ricocheted through the corridors of power, it set a series of events in motion that would have far-reaching implications. On that day, the state's attorney, a nimble mind with a burgeoning reputation for social reform, petitioned for a sidebar meeting, a rare moment where potential shifts in justice systems emerge. Her name was Daniela Cruz, known among colleagues as a tactical visionary, and she carried the weight of her title with unwavering commitment to the greater good. Approaching Maurice during a recess, Daniela's demeanor crackled with urgency. "Judge Jordan, I believe we have an opportunity here to go beyond the current scope of this trial," she began, her tone forthright and compelling. Maurice nodded, curiosity piqued by her statement. "I'm listening, Ms. Cruz. What do you propose?" She drew a breath, collecting her thoughts with precision. Nathan Dean's admission exposed more than just his personal culpability. It hints at a systemic pattern within the precinct. "We've long suspected corruption, but a case as high profile as yours could be our foothold for wider investigation," she explained, her words a blend of hope and careful pragmatism. Maurice weighed the proposition against the trial's backdrop, a tapestry of truths painstakingly woven together yet yearning to extend further into an intricate mosaic highlighting systemic failings. "If we pursue this," he began thoughtfully, "it must be thorough, and our intentions must be clear. This cannot be seen as a witch hunt against officers, but rather an indictment of a diseased system." Daniela nodded in agreement, her resolve mirrored in Maurice's careful gaze. "I couldn't agree more. We've received signals from other members within law enforcement, conscious grumblings, let's call them. It seems Nathan's bravery might stir others to come forward." Maurice considered this, recognizing the potential impact of launching a comprehensive inquiry. He glimpsed the new trajectory forming, from individual accountability towards systemic reform, a testament to the power of a single voice ripple through institutional inertia. "If we do this," Maurice cautioned, "it's imperative we brace ourselves for backlash. Reform rarely comes without resistance, yet if it exposes the depths of injustice, then it's a stand I'm prepared to take." Daniela met his gaze, a consensus forging in shared understanding. "With your support, I believe we have a chance to effect genuine change, not just for us, Judge Jordan, but for every community waiting on hope packaged as justice." Throughout this sidebar, murmurs of activity persisted in the courtroom, a scene set to transition from drama to decision, interwoven by expectations and the desire to rectify wrongs no longer veiled in silence. Returning to proceedings, Maurice felt a renewed clarity settle over him. The plan set forth, with Daniela's collaboration, would hinge on administrative approval, a dialogue with city officials willing to embrace transparency over tradition. It was ambitious, fraught with political intricacies, yet he believed change was not only necessary but within grasp. As the day's session concluded, Maxwell Langley, now inwardly contemplative, approached the bench. The young officer, visibly moved by the day's revelations, seemed to carry Nathan's newfound resolve within himself. "Judge Jordan," he began, hesitance lacing his words, "I want to say I didn't do what Nathan did, but I also didn't stop it. I wish I had." Maurice listened, acknowledging Langley's admission, which, albeit tardy, signaled where growth could spring from seeds of regret. He responded, the strength of his voice softened by empathy. "Mr. Langley, it's not too late to start. Your actions moving forward will speak truer than words today." Langley nodded, the semblance of a path dawning in his acknowledgement, a path not defined by past shortcomings, but by the decisions yet to make. The courtroom emptied for the day, the echoes of disclosure lingering like a steadfast promise. The fight for justice continued, expansive as it was personal, yet each participant, witnesses, officials, community members, departed with a renewed sense that justice, real justice, was not just an illusion, but an achievable destination on the horizon where truth reigns supreme. This emerging coalition, born from mistake and repentance, pledged to harness their collective will in pursuit of reform. The trial would be catalogued in history, yes, but its true legacy would speak through tangible change, a reimagined landscape rooted in humanity and honor. Beyond the courthouse doors, Maurice stood, buoyed by the weight of possibilities now nudged into motion. Before him unfurled the future, ready to be defined not by inertia, but by daring. The daring to hold compassion above complacency, empowering seeds of change long whispered in echoes of resilient utterance. Morning light flooded the streets as a quiet revolution unfurled within the veins of New York City's judiciary system. Maurice Jordan, still resonating with the echoes of past days, entered the courthouse with a new determination etched into his stride, a stride now shadowed by allies unseen, but deeply felt. The possibility for transformation loomed large, its promise interwoven into each step of his solemn journey. Inside, the courthouse was abuzz with an energy that moved like an undercurrent, whispering of change in corridors long familiar with stagnation. As Maurice stepped into his chambers, he was met by a figure waiting with calm resolve. Judge Rebecca Sanchez, a peer from the appellate division with whom he shared a mutual respect, stood poised with a marked intensity. Her presence was an unexpected but welcome beacon. Few could engage Maurice with equal fervor for justice, and Rebecca was a rare comrade in the tumultuous sea of their profession. "Maurice," she began, her voice carrying both urgency and camaraderie, "I heard about yesterday's developments and wanted to speak with you directly." Maurice nodded, gesturing her to sit. "I appreciate you reaching out, Rebecca. These are pivotal times." Rebecca leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "They are, indeed. The truth is, this trial has thrown into sharp relief the undercurrents we've both long since roiling beneath the surface." Maurice knew she alluded to the unspoken battles waged silently within various judicial chambers, microcosmic reflections of society's broader struggles. Their shared insights were tacit, yet profound, forging a trust that belied their occasional divergent ruling. "We've got a real chance here," she continued. "You remember the alliance we discussed months ago? The coalition of judges and legal minds intent on addressing these systemic issues. I believe the time has come to act decisively." The memory flickered through Maurice's mind like a lantern suddenly lit in darkness. They'd spoken during a conference, a meeting over coffee underpinning their shared vision of judicial reform, a network of allies determined to redefine the sunlit uplands of justice. "Yes," Maurice acknowledged, the idea taking root as fertile soil met seed. "But as you know, moving from conception to action is fraught with hurdles." Rebecca's expression morphed into pragmatic determination. "True, but there's momentum now, Maurice. Tap into it. We've been quietly assembling support, judges, attorneys, even clerks, wanting change. Your trial has revealed fault lines that we can no longer ignore." It was a revelation, but not unforeseen, a confluence of hope and action, quietly gathering strength, eager to test its mettle against long-standing inertia. Maurice felt its pull, not as an obligation, but as a moral imperative. "How do you see us moving forward?" Maurice questioned, the path daring him to step into its uncharted expanse. Rebecca's response was unwavering, her confidence a testament to the coalition's latent power. "We've drafted proposals for a comprehensive review board, independent oversight mechanisms, and community engagement protocols. Each of these could alter the landscape of accountability for our legal system." Maurice absorbed the gravity of her words, appreciating the mosaic of strategies aligning with his own visions. "Strategically, it's a step toward systemic recalibration," he mused, contemplating the far-reaching impacts. "But we must prepare for inevitable resistance," Rebecca agreed, aware of the delicate balance needed to sustain reform without fracturing existing structures. "Yes, which is why visible leadership matters. Voices the community trusts." Your position as a judge uniquely situates you to bridge that gap. A responsibility unfurled within the solemn silence that followed. A duty to stand as both catalyst and caretaker, guiding reformation with a steady hand. Maurice accepted its weight willingly. The mantle augmented now with the backing of principled allies. Rebecca rose, extending her hand, grounding their partnership with tangible affirmation. Together, Maurice, we can enact real change. I'll gather the others for our next steps. Let's coordinate our efforts to ensure reach and impact. Maurice met her grip with unspoken solidarity. Count me in, he affirmed, hearing the echo of those same words mirrored in countless courtrooms, civic meetings, and advocacy forums, spaces where aspirations flourished beyond the constraints of words. As Rebecca departed, Maurice remained in his office, thoughtful resolve tempering excitement. The day ahead would resume the arduous journey of trial, but beneath its surface lay orders of magnitude more, a coalition destined to tilt the scales toward progress long overdue. Walking through the courthouse halls shortly after, Maurice carried the surety of a clandestine network, unyielding in its commitment, ready to reshape the ethos of their calling. It was not merely a personal crusade, but a shared mission interwoven into the fabric of a community rising to demystify justice and empower societal healing. Beyond the walls, life resumed its pace, oblivious to the burgeoning ripple of reform set to crest over the horizon. Quiet, inexorable, yet heralded by the steady hands poised to steer its course. As Maurice prepared to recommence the trial, the judicial clock ticking softly, he was heartened, not only by his own resolve, but by the harmonizing symphony of purpose and progress, a song yet unsung, resounding into the future. As the trial continued outside the courthouse, the atmosphere was electric with the protracted tension of a city stretched across moral and social tectonic plates. Media vans lined the streets like sentinels, their satellites probing the sky, eager to beam updates across the nation. The case had transcended its local origins, igniting national discourse around systemic racism and police accountability. In this crucible of public attention, celebrities, activists, and influencers began to lend their voices, their platforms amplifying the burgeoning call for justice that had been catalyzed within the courtroom. The air was alive with possibility, charged by the kindling of discourse long overdue for combustion. The press conference podium, centered in the courtyard against a backdrop of cameras and eager journalists, buzzed with anticipation. Among those present was Angela Chang, an esteemed activist and leader with a reputation for mobilizing social movements with strategic brilliance. Flanked by fellow advocates, she stepped forward, her presence commanding and assured. The crowd, a tapestry of supporters and skeptics alike, quieted as she began. Today, we stand unified in demanding accountability, not just from individuals, but from a system that has for far too long perpetuated inequality and injustice. This trial, under Judge Maurice Jordan's impartial gavel, is not merely about determining guilt, but about shining a light on practices that must be dismantled. Her words rippled through the assembly, finding resonance with those who believed change was attainable. Behind the microphone, Angela's voice was both clarion call and steadfast lighthouse, illuminating a path forward fraught with challenges, yet vibrant with potential. As Judge Jordan seeks the truth within court, we must embody this pursuit in our communities, our dialogues, and our laws. This is our moment to shift narratives and demand reforms that reflect our shared humanity, Angela continued, her tone seamless in sincerity and strength. Inside, the courtroom proceedings echoed Angela's sentiments, each testimony and piece of evidence adding new layers to the mosaic of accountability being assembled. As witnesses took the stand, detailing their interactions with the accused officers and their experiences with systemic discrimination, Nathan Dean's earlier admission had thrown open the floodgates of honesty. Now others within the precinct began echoing truths long swallowed by silence. Officers previously reticent to challenge the status quo found courage beneath Maurice's unyielding pursuit of justice, compelled to speak their piece and unmask the institutional blemishes once inhospitable to daylight. Each revelation formed an undeniable bulwark against those who argued for the preservation of corrosive traditions, wrapped in the guise of security. Yet resistance was not absent, lurking within the structures of power reluctant to change. Defense attorneys dug deep, attempting to obfuscate the clarity Maurice brought to each preceding detail, targeting perceived weakness with calculated precision. Maurice, however, remained unfazed. His role as arbiter was suffused with the calm certitude of a man who not only understood the law, but believed in its potential as a vehicle for transformation. Beyond the forensic precision of legal examination emerged a vivid tapestry of lives intersected by prejudice, a dialogue amplified outside the courthouse, where Angela's rally cry catalyzed public consensus for tangible change. That night, the media buzz grew, spreading through social media like wildfire among television broadcasts and online editorial pieces. Celebrities from various arenas took to their platforms, vocalizing support and redirecting their own starlit spotlight onto the necessary reforms the trial had highlighted. Tweets unfurled like digital banners, spreading awareness with messages layered with persuasion and urgency. Online petitions soared into the hundreds of thousands, signatures gathering like raindrops forming an inevitable torrent. The call for reform was carried cross-country, a clarion declaration resonating through cities and towns, demanding reviews of police practices, accountability protocols, and educational imperatives in training programs. As media coverage deepened, commentators parsed every detail, every nuance of the trial, their analyses threading through the intricate intersections of law and society, race and justice. Everything hinged on outcomes that would reverberate through each courtroom thereafter, a precedent-setting milestone in the battle for equity. Back within the courthouse confines, Maurice prepared for another day within this living tapestry of consequence, knowing that the impact of his verdict would extend beyond litigation into the bloodstream of a society ready for revitalization. The nation watched, waited, and hoped. Hopes, aspirations, and demands born from an era crying for discernment, staking its claim upon correctness, forging a collective path where justice's promise found its true reflection. And as he glimpsed the open skies beyond chamber windows, Maurice knew history stood poised, its next chapter ready to embrace those brave enough to write it anew, ever unyielding to the resigned siren call of inertia. A pulse echoed through the courthouse and the city, one consistent beat that radiated potential for both healing and creation, a determined anthem arisen from both margins and center alike, forging onward undeterred. As the trial wound towards its climax, the courtroom took on a sense of heightened imminence, the culmination of weeks of revelations, testimonies, and public introspection converging upon a singular point of justice. Onlookers filled the gallery, a cross-section of a nation transfixed by the proceedings that had become both a stage for accountability and a mirror reflecting society's tangled complexity. Maurice Jordan, firmly established at the helm, navigated the courtroom with a practiced gravitas that settled the encompassing aura of expectation. Before him lay the task of wading through layers of truth and obscuration, trusting in justice's unerring compass to guide him. Just as the day's schedule commenced, an unexpected development riveted attention. A piece of evidence unearthed, reminiscent of a long-buried relic unearthed from obscurity to challenge the narrative built thus far. It was presented as a set of internal documents from within the precinct, documents suggesting collusion and covering up instances akin to those encountered during Maurice's own arrest. The revelation sent ripples of shock and intrigue through the court. reverberating outward to a city already on edge. The atmosphere crackled as truths hinted at in whispers now boomed with newfound authority into the open. Maurice regarded the new evidence with the impartial eye of experience, aware that its implications could extend beyond the current proceedings and into the systemic rot so fervently sought to be excised. He nodded for the prosecutor to present the unfolding details, the weight of anticipation pressing in. As these documents demonstrate, the prosecutor explained, there exists a pattern of behavior where minor offenses were inflated and records were deliberately manipulated to perpetuate narratives of criminality, reflecting bias and contrived justifications. The room hung on each syllable, silent but for the scribble of journalists' pens mirroring the import in ink and bites. Among the defense, visible unease twisted across the faces of officers, unprepared for the layers now peeled back with surgical precision. Officer Langley shifted restlessly where he sat, the weight of collective responsibility bearing heavily upon him. Nathan Dean, resolute within his earlier admissions, watched the proceedings through the lens of hard-won redemption, conscious of the broader ramifications extending from his earlier choice to illuminate shadows with truth. The prosecutor, aware of the narrative now woven tightly amidst legal text and lived experience, continued to unravel their case, a tapestry rich with consequence and exemplification. These documents expose not just individual failings, but wider systemic practices that must be held accountable, the prosecutor asserted. They represent a breach of public trust that we all depend upon to maintain the sanctity of justice. The courtroom buzzed with contained energy, murmurs amplifying into a tapestry of discernment and contemplation. Defendants watched, their defense scrambling to recalibrate strategy in light of revelations, forming a noose seemingly drawn from mere potential to inextricable certainty. Amid this drama, Maurice guided discussions towards nuanced understanding, threading through legal loopholes with clarity and impeccable balance. His oversight left little room for evasion, honing in on each turn with the dexterity that marked his judicial acumen. Whether by fate or by justice long prepared, the day's developments were significant in both scope and statement, reinforcing the underlying realities forced into the harsh illumination of scrutiny. Beyond the proceedings, the streets bore banners of solidarity, diverse faces joining in a unified resolve that extended the courtroom's revelations into the fabric of societal experience. Signs challenging justice for all fluttered in the breeze, infusing hope and urgency into city veins thrumming with awareness. As the court recessed for the day, Maurice stood, his gaze traversing the courtroom, an intimate familiarity balancing the gravitas of moments that echoed larger movements. Each face within the space represented a story, an experience tied to the trial's broader narrative, a human tapestry etched in challenges and yearnings for an equitable future. Walking through hallways buzzing with implication, Maurice held fast to the ethos guiding him, not as merely the arbiter of one case, but as custodian and craftsman of a shifting paradigm. He understood deeply the work yet to be done, the threads of promise suspended in tenuous expectation. Back beyond the courthouse steps, whispers of hope gained volume, journalists and passers-by alike sharing their perceptions and insights. This tapestry of opinions wove itself into the city's soul, a story unfolding upon a larger canvas where justice intersected with potential and promise, reverberated through the air. Inside the courthouse, as courthouse walls bore witness, each momentary ripple poised to crest anew, Maurice knew the trial's impact, its significance unharnessed yet compelling, would linger, carving future pathways from past iniquity toward a shared landscape envisaged with consciousness born of trial, tribute, and ultimate transformation. Thus the day closed, threads of integrity, accountability, and justice binding judge and judged attributes together, advancing inexorably towards closure with the firm hand of equitable resolve poised deftly at its helm. In the days that followed, the courthouse steps became a focal point of assembly, a living testament to the civic awakening sparked by the trial. As the city leaned into the promise of change, community leaders, activists, and allies gathered in the courtyard, transforming it into a stage for solidarity, a forum for heartfelt discourse demanding reform. Maurice Jordan stood at the heart of this convocation, surrounded by voices lifting him not only as a symbol of justice, but as a trusted architect of its evolution. Angela Chang, whose enduring advocacy marked her as a stalwart of the movement, stood beside him, her presence a beacon of resilience and empowerment. The air was thick with the essence of possibility and the hum of anticipatory determination. Loris's voice, when it finally arose to address the throng, resonated with both authority and humility, grounding the vision shared by those gathered. My friends, this assembly embodies the spirit of what we seek, not just a legal victory, but the recognition of our collective strength and purpose, he began, his words threading through the audience, binding their varied histories into a tapestry of defiance and hope. The crowd responded with applause, a reverberation of unity that transcended mere acknowledgement, echoing courage long overdue yet urgently articulated. Maurice continued, each phrase a brushstroke against the canvas of social progress. We stand in the cradle of change, but it's what we do beyond today that defines our future, he declared, his conviction infusing the words with an enduring truth. Justice is not static, it's a living entity, shaped by the values we uphold and the action we commit to. We are here to ensure it is accessible to everyone, irrefutable in its fairness. Angela stepped forward, the sun casting her voice in vivid light. We've started something here that ripples across the city, and indeed across the nation, she asserted, her spirit undeterred by the enormity of the mission. Because of you, because of us, this movement takes flight, lifting the weight of silence. With the undeniable force of our voices, the chorus of agreement affirmed their shared mission. Here, civic leaders and grassroots organizers entwined efforts with that of Judge Jordan, jointly navigating a path through procedural entanglements toward open fields of equitable justice. Within the courthouse, undercurrents of unanimity resonated. Conversations ignited among officials and stakeholders questioning practices and their roles in perpetuating imbalances. Seeds planted through the courage of individuals like Nathan Dean bore the promise of institutional transformation, naturally embraced by those seeking reform. As daylight waned, Maurice found himself in quiet reflection within his chambers, contemplating the strides made and those yet ahead. He knew the landscape of justice was shifting, a tectonic realignment long contested by those entrenched in the status quo, now reimagined by a coalition undeterred in its resolve. The resonance of discord earlier in the day settled into a murmurous calm as reality's embrace formed a mantle of solidarity upon which to build, each scaffold of reform reinforcing another. These cumulative efforts, echoing through every courtroom, school hallway, and community meeting, emphasized the transformative potential not just in trials won, but in narratives reclaimed and redefined. On the horizon, Maurice glimpsed the contours of a future reflecting true justice, drawing energy from adherence to ideals worthy of their collective struggle, vibrant innovations rather than muted retreads of flawed tradition. His role, the intersection of judicial authority and empathetic stewardship, was clear within this broader tapestry, emphasizing not just judgment rendered, but wisdom discerned and action liberated from complacent bonds. He realized that the journey ahead, formidable yet inevitable, was enlivened by the pulse of shared humanity, the placement of trust among evolving terrain, motivated by kinship over division, and collaboration instead of isolation. Maurice rose, embracing the invigorating momentum born of trials, both literal and figurative. Under city lights, he ventured outside to observe the vibrant gathering, dispersing yet resolute, a reflection of community and commitment radiating across the skyline. As he stepped forward into the night, buoyed by a city awakening to its revitalized conscience, Maurice carried within him the tranquility of clarity twin-storied with the fervor of progress demanded. Justice was nowhere more poignant, poised in hushed anticipation for the work yet required, the endless ethic of tenacity, shaping the world anew through each stride undaunted, each voice unsilenced. Amid the pulse of civic unity, a singular promise persisted, unyielding in its quest, steeped in the hope of horizons yet unfurled. As the city rested, its dreams entwined with determination, the echoes of justice envisioned reached farther afield than any singular trial could encompass, resonating through history not as fleeting ephemera, but as an everlasting testament to humanity's indomitable resolve. In the days that followed, the trial's grip on the public's imagination only intensified. Lights from the cameras flickered constantly outside the courthouse, capturing every shift in the narrative as it unfolded. This case, once merely a legal matter, had become a cultural touchstone. Drawing the attention of influential figures from across the nation, celebrities and activists began to arrive in the city, not just to observe but to actively lend their voices, infusing the movement with amplified resonance. Among them were actors, musicians, athletes, all united by a shared purpose. Their platforms turned into powerful amplifiers for the message of justice and reform. One particular morning, as Maurice prepared to enter the courtroom, he found a crowd gathered outside, larger and more diverse than ever. Banners floated in the breeze, carrying slogans demanding justice and equality. Faces easily recognizable from television and cinema appeared among the throng, bringing with them not just fame, but influence, a currency more potent than words alone could trade. At the forefront stood Jamal Carter, an actor whose roles in films explored themes of social justice and civil rights, a narrative as familiar to him as his own skin. With a charisma that commanded attention, Jamal was a natural orator, a voice that could penetrate the barriers of ignorance and apathy with eloquence and precision. The assembled crowd quieted as Jamal stepped forward, his presence radiating purpose. "This trial is more than a legal proceeding," he began, capturing the collective consciousness within his words. "It's about confronting a legacy of prejudice with the full force of our humanity. It's a statement that silence will no longer suffice when lives and dignity are on the line." His voice, imbued with unwavering conviction, reached deep into the fabric of those present, pulling at threads of complacency and summoning the courage to demand more for communities, for systems, for the souls entangled within them. Justice isn't just something we passively await, it's something we actively pursue in solidarity, Jamal continued, gesturing expansively to encompass everyone gathered. This is our moment, to say that the future is one we shape together with equity and empathy as our guides. The crowd responded with fervent applause, their voices rising in harmony with Jamal's call to action. The energy was palpable, alive with the shared belief that change was both necessary and within reach. Inside the courthouse, the proceedings continued to reflect the day's vigor. Witnesses took the stand, emboldened by the external resonance echoing within. Testimonies became more than just statements. They were acts of resistance, declarations reclaimed from the clutches of fear. Maurice, grounding the tumultuous exchanges with his steady presence, facilitated the day's events with a balance reflective of his belief in justice's malleability, not fixed but dynamic, capable of growth when nurtured. As the day converged toward its conclusion, the celebrity endorsements garnered increased media scrutiny and coverage. Interviews and features highlighted influential figures sharing their perspectives, not just in support of Maurice's trial, but of a broader societal shift long stymied by inertia. Articles dissected the trial's nuances, the weight of moral authority juxtaposed with the specifics of legal accountability. Arguments for systemic overhaul ricocheted across platforms, igniting conversations within living rooms, classrooms, and boardrooms alike. Social media, perhaps the era's most potent conduit of change, was awash with dialogue, a cacophony of voices, hashtags, galvanizing action, and encouraging discourse across digital divides. Images from the courthouse steps became viral, symbols emblematic of adversity met with unified resolve. Behind the scenes, calls made by influential figures to city officials and policymakers precipitated a dialogue rarely heard before, one encompassing reformative action within the precinct and beyond, reinforcing dialogues instigated inside the courtroom. Stepping out into the evening air after a day resonant with justice's imperative, Maurice found the coalition gathered once again, a living monument to perseverance and hope. He felt the momentum tangible and pulsating, carrying them forward like a tide irresistible in its determination. Maurice took a moment, standing before the gathering in quiet contemplation. He knew that, despite the formidable path ahead, here, amid the fervent resolve of allies and champions, progress was not just possible but imminent. The gathering shared his resolve, each member cognizant of the role they played within the greater tapestry weaving its pattern upon society's conscience. In this space, where identity and purpose intertwined, the essence of democratic ideals took root, nourished by collective ambition and shared dreams. As night fell, the city shimmered with newfound clarity, its streets illuminated by street lamps and the promise of rekindled justice. Maurice carried this illumination with him, letting it guide him through the night and into futures still burgeoning with potential and possibility. Tomorrow beckoned, ripe with the promise of fortitude forged in the crucible of trial and testament. But tonight, in this cherished moment beneath an endless constellation, Maurice stood content in the promise that justice, vigilant and vibrant, was evolving within hearts steadfast and unyielding, an ember ready to ignite the world anew with the brilliance of what might be. As the trial continued to unfold with all its gripping developments, Maurice Jordan found himself at the very epicenter of a movement that was redefining what justice could mean in a changing world. Each morning, as he donned the robes of his office, he was acutely aware that his every decision carried the weight of national scrutiny, a responsibility he shouldered with both pride and the keen awareness of its fragility. The courtroom had become more than a battleground of legal arguments. It was now a theater for the interplay of truth and transformation. Every corner, every bench seemed infused with the stories of those who had come to bear witness to a profound moment in history, a touchstone in the evolving narrative of civil rights. On a particularly charged morning, before the gavels began their symphony of accountability, Maurice found himself standing before a cohort of reporters and community leaders, eagerly anticipating a statement. He took a moment to greet them, not as distant authority, but as one among equals, entrusted with the duty to articulate the aspirations fueling their collective resolve. "I've thought long and deeply over what is unfolding here," Maurice began, his voice carrying the assertive timbre of someone accustomed to the intricacies of persuasion, yet threaded with an uncommon transparency. "And I can say this: justice is not merely a verdict, it is a continuous commitment to courage in the face of complacency." The ground beneath them thrummed with the energy of anticipation, silent yet resonant, like waves meeting the sand, a parallel of action meeting consequence. Maurice paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the assembly. "This trial is a call to our community and beyond, a challenge to reflect on those parts of our system that do not serve us equally, to engage in dialogue, and to tear down barriers we once believed immovable. As he spoke, the clarity of conviction illuminated faces softened by time and seasoned with struggle. Here was a judge, unafraid to traverse the bridge between courtroom and community, inviting those watching to consider justice not as a static institution, but as a living doctrine. Regardless of the outcome within these walls, Maurice continued, gaining momentum, our true victory lies in how we move forward from here, together. I commit to being a part of that journey, and I invite you all to take part. Applause surged through the gathering, not mere formalities but a unified endorsement of Maurice's pledge. It held no small amount of risk, this marriage of judicial impartiality with advocacy for systemic reformation, yet Maurice knew from experience that, on the road to progress, risks were sometimes necessary fires, and he was prepared to be its steady flame. Throughout the day's proceedings, Maurice remained focused, every word spoken, motion filed, and emotion displayed, under the purchasing gaze of a public newly attuned to justice's nuance. Each testimony seemed to move with visible heft, as though it carried the tide of change with it. Yet what solidified the day's resonance wasn't just the evidence or testimonies meticulously unveiled, but rather a moment, unexpected in its quiet reverence. During recess, Nathan Dean, whose admissions had previously cracked the facade of unquestioned authority, approached Maurice with deference, intent visible in every step. "Judge Jordan," Nathan began, his voice earnest, fragile in its transparency, "I wanted to say thank you, not just for what you're doing here, but for what this trial means for people like me, seeking redemption." Maurice nodded, acknowledging the courage abundant in the honesty Nathan had shared. "Every step forward is not without past stumbles, Officer Dean. Your decision to speak truth has already set in motion change beyond this room." Nathan appeared buoyed by Maurice's words, a reminder that redemption isn't just a solitary pursuit, but a shared pathway intersecting lives fraught with possibility. As the trial commenced once more, Maurice felt an internal ensemble playing, a crescendo of resolve and clarity, a silent promise to those watching and waiting, a vow shaped by conviction and bound to those sharing in its undertaking. Beyond the courthouse, the city pulsed with life and waiting change, each street corner capturing the story of those carrying torches forward, preparing to light pathways yet darkened by uncertainty. Maurice's mind, however, was firmly on the intricate dance of justice inside. He resolved to deliver not just a verdict but a vision, a future where justice reigned as a dynamic force, rich with empathy, grounded in equality, and incorruptible in its integrity. The echoes of applause from earlier whispered through the courtroom as proceedings continued, and Maurice stood ever ready to bring them into focus, assured in knowing he was not alone in this venture, dancing along tightly held lines to reshape the legal landscape as not just a judge but as an ally, committed to justice truly served. Inside the labyrinthine corridors of the city's police department, the pressure was palpable, a simmering tension ready to boil over. The trial had exposed more than just the malfeasance of a few officers. It had drawn back the curtains on a culture of silence and complicity that pervaded the precinct. Nathan Dean's confession had been the first domino, and as it fell, it sent shockwaves through the walls that had long protected the status quo. Behind closed doors, the precinct captain, a man usually stoically composed, now paced the room with nervous energy. His officers, gathered at the margins of the room, exchanged wary glances, aware that the ground beneath their feet was shifting irreversibly. The captain, Officer Ward, paused to address the room, his voice heavy. "We've hit a turning point, folks. The trial has cast us under a lens more scrutinizing than any before. It's time we decide whether we're going to fight this or become part of the solution." His words hung in the air, thick with implication. The officers around him, many accustomed to the rhythms of power exercised without question, now faced a future uncertain. The atmosphere was charged with a palpable unease about what accountability would demand. Officer Langley, caught up in the maelstrom swirling around him, felt the weight of decisions left unmade. The memories of past actions lingered like shadows, inhibiting clear thought. Yet within Nathan's act of contrition, Langley had glimpsed something he long thought inaccessible, a road towards reclamation. Realizing he had to act, Langley stepped forward, nerves tinged with determination. "Captain, we've got a responsibility not just to protect our own, but to rebuild trust. If that means owning up to our part in this, then we have to be ready." His voice quavered slightly, yet carried a conviction that demanded attention. The room fell silent, the tension made more acute by his unexpected defection from passive complicity towards active acknowledgement. Ward regarded him with a careful eye, aware that Langley's words encapsulated a growing sentiment within the department. "You're right, Langley. The status quo isn't sustainable, but it's going to take guts to face the past and work toward a new path." Silence followed, the officers navigating their internal landscapes, each confronted by the realization that reform started with hard truths bravely told. Still, not everyone stood ready to embrace the uncertain depths of change. There existed pockets of resistance clinging to the past, unwilling to surrender the safety of familiar power dynamics. What had sufficed for decades now felt precarious, and some found the prospect of true accountability more daunting than any external threat. Amid this internal reckoning, whispers and murmured confessions began threading through the precinct. Younger officers swapping accounts over shared lunches, seasoned detectives sifting through old cases with fresh eyes, all seeking to reconcile with the unearthed reality. For these officers, the trial wasn't just a public spectacle, but a mirror, reflecting themselves in a light unfiltered by denial. Nathan Dean, once a paragon of the very system under scrutiny, was now approached with questions from colleagues bewildered by his sudden transparency. His newfound role, unprecedented, held not only the scars of his previous silence, but the potential for leading others toward a painful yet hopeful rebirth. Facing inquiries that challenged moral fiber, Nathan repeated what Maurice Jordan had instilled. Justice is about action. What we do now defines who we'll become. Why not make it count for something more? This refrain quietly spread, like water seeking its way through stone, with Langley and others grasping its urgency. In this exchange of ideas and admissions, individual actions aligned under a banner of reform too vibrant to dismiss. Outside the confines of precinct meetings, initiatives prompted by external advocates and city planners took shape. Plans for de-escalation training, community interactions, and revised protocols overtook agendas in an effort to bridge the chasm between fear and understanding, a tangible response to the courtroom's call for restitution. As day slipped to night, the precinct buzzed with an unfamiliar energy, some fierce and resistant, others tentative yet earnest. Maurice's trial had birthed a new consciousness inside those walls, a consciousness defined by the promise of redemption and renewal, a chance to become parts of a solution rather than relics of a problematic institution. Back in the heart of the department, Officer Ward gathered his thoughts, finding inspiration not in authority but in vulnerability, the courage to embrace change and foster evolution within bricks, once synonymous with stagnancy. He knew the road was steep, fraught with opposition and risk, but like Langley, he saw the horizon beckoning, wide open, yet requiring every ounce of their determined sincerity to tread toward it. With shared purpose, they leaned at long last into the formidable architecture of progress, ready to shape a precinct and city devoted to justice, no longer bound by chains of historical bias, but buoyed by aspirations of integrity and transparency. Accountability, not as a threatening concept, but as a compass guiding them ever forward. In the charged atmosphere of the courthouse, revelations continued to churn, peeling back the veneer of routine to expose deeper, long-hidden truths. The narrative that had once been a single man's struggle against injustice had grown into a tapestry of intertwined lives and systemic flaws, each new piece contributing to a fuller panorama of accountability and change. Maurice Jordan, in the thick of these proceedings, felt the undercurrents of tension giving way to a burgeoning sense of possibility, a fissure in the tightly woven fabric of entrenched systems, offering the first glimpses of light. As the trial progressed, it became clear that the officers' admissions marked just the beginning of a broader reckoning. Law enforcement officials, pressed both by internal reviews and external pressures, began to come forward with accounts that painted a damning picture of the precinct's culture. A particularly powerful moment came when a senior officer, Sergeant Carla Jenkins, took the stand. Her reputation as a by-the-book officer had earned her respect across the department, yet in this climate of change, respect bore the weight of responsibility. Sergeant Jenkins, can you speak to the culture within the precinct during the time in question? The prosecutor inquired, her question deftly aimed to unlock truths sheltered behind walls of feigned ignorance. Carla hesitated momentarily, her eyes finding Maurice's steady gaze, a silent promise that truth would be met with dignity, not disdain. She exhaled, a deliberate release of tension scripted by years of silence. It's hard to pinpoint exactly when things shifted, Carla began, her voice a blend of resolution and regret. But over time, procedures meant to ensure fairness warped into machinations of misuse. Some officers equated arrest counts with effectiveness rather than justice, and it created a skewed perception of our role in the community. Her testimony, spoken with a candor born of internal struggle, poised a mirror before the court, reflecting back the systemic substructure requiring redress. Was it common to overlook this behavior? Pressed the prosecutor, keenly aware of the weight vested in Carla's response. Carla's frankness continued unabashed. There were times we were encouraged to turn a blind eye for the sake of reputation, an unspoken rule which too often became justification for bias. Gasps traced through the gallery, reverberating among the onlookers, a collective intake of disbelief at the culture unveiled. Maurice's expression remained unmoved, providing an anchor for the trial's turbulent revelations. The trial, already a herald for transformation, now began to pull at the seams of credibility within policing frameworks, threatening to burst wide the inconsistencies and complicity lying dormant. In community halls and online forums, the floodgates burst open, with personal narratives as people shared stories echoing the courtroom's revelations. Dialogues initiated by reform advocates gained momentum, propelled by a growing commitment to recalibrate the societal expectations of justice. Maurice found himself at the helm of a trial not just of individuals, but of ideologies. The weight not solely an adjudicating burden, but a mantle of leadership through uncharted waters. He recognized the stories held within this courtroom would serve as keystones for broader efforts of reconciliation and reform. Within the precinct, where earlier waves of confession met resistant shores, a reckoning began to coalesce. Those like Nathan Dean and Maxwell Langley, who had bravely stepped forward, witnessed their courage become a beacon, drawing others to speak. The shifts within the department reflected cascades of personal and institutional reckoning, officers now confronting repercussive histories with renewed courage. There were tears, reconciliations, and paths carved towards redemption within the precinct walls, paths intertwining aspirations of justice with a renewed integrity. As the trial drew nearer to a verdict, Maurice was vivid in his comprehension. Every decision rendered now stood as a testament to collective willpower pulling against the riptides of prior inaction. Across the city, a palpable change took root, planted in the foundation of hearts, awakened by accountability's imperative. The hopeful sought not only retribution, but harmony, an alignment of ethical practice with empathy, steeped in justice's timeless pursuit. And so, as the courtroom's day came to a close, bathed in the hue of late afternoon's amber glow, Maurice paused to take in the gathered faces, witnesses to a process more comprehensive than any singular judgment. Here the courtroom assumed new significance, a crucible of transformation knitting together the threads of community and conscience into patterns resistant to previous neglect. Its doors, once harbingers of uncertainty, now swung wide to reveal a future collectively built by deeply held convictions and hard-won commitments poised upon the precipice of history. Maurice prepared to lead the city forward, navigating its tumultuous yet promising waters, buoyed by shared belief in a justice that no longer surrendered to antiquated practices but embraced challenges with resilience, patience, and profound humanity. Each step forward marked a dawn drawn anew, resplendent with possibilities as sure and steady as the pulse of a hopeful heart, reflected in the gaze of lives forever changed. The anticipation in the courtroom was palpable as the final day of the trial dawned. The corridors were thick with the hum of expectation, every corner turned, seeming to echo the collective holding of breath. This day promised more than a verdict. It offered a resolution that carried the weight of a city's hopes for justice restored. Maurice Jordan, at the helm of this unfolding narrative, felt the significance of the moment wash over him as he donned his robes. Today, the decisions he made would not just resound through the legal system, but would ripple through the very fabric of society, pressed against the fulcrum of change. As proceedings began, the courtroom settled into a reverent hush. Attorneys from both sides prepared their final arguments, every word carefully selected, imbued with the gravity of consequence. The prosecutor rose first, her command of the room honed by days of tireless advocacy. She addressed the jury with a voice that carried both the clarity of facts and the emotion of human stories, interwoven into the case. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "what we've witnessed in this courtroom goes beyond individual guilt or innocence. We've glimpsed a system in need of recalibration, brought into stark relief by the courage of those who have testified." Her gaze swept across the room, gathering the intensity of shared experiences. The officers on trial are accountable for their actions, but this case is also a catalyst for wider change, a call to each of us to engage in the necessary transformation of our justice systems. The jury listened intently, their understanding deepened by weeks of unfolding truths. As the prosecutor returned to her seat, the defense prepared to counter in what would be their client's last opportunity to sway the scales. The defense attorney, aware of the tumultuous landscape they tread, approached carefully. His words sought to draw sympathy, not for the actions unveiled, but for the humanity of those caught within flawed system. "We acknowledge that errors were made," he conceded, the phrase almost drowned by the understatement of what had been revealed. "Our hope, however, is that you view these as failures not just of individuals but of institutional pressures. These officers are products of a culture we're all complicit in, and they deserve compassion as much as scrutiny." The jury absorbed these closing remarks, faces marked with the depth of introspection prompted by such complex moral terrain. Silence unfurled its wings, casting a moment of stillness over the courtroom, a pause before the momentum gathered its force. With both sides having made their final appeals, the baton was now passed to Maurice. As he prepared to address the court, his heartbeat was steady, yet charged with the nuances of a decision steeped in history and expectation. He looked across the room, meeting the eyes of the accused, the victims, the public faces longing for justice, their gazes a tapestry of hope, fear, and resilience stitched together by circumstance. "Today, we conclude a trial that has been as much about reflection as it is about resolution," Maurice began, his voice embodying the solemnity of the moment. "What we have learned throughout these proceedings extends beyond guilt or innocence. It shines a light on the imperative to evolve, a call to action that must extend into every sphere where justice is pursued." His words flowed like a tide, relentless yet nurturing, nourishing the shared consciousness within those walls. For those found guilty, justice will dictate consequence, ensuring accountability in accordance with the law. But let us not mistake punishment for progress. True progress lies in our continued commitment to review, to reform, and to rebuild. The courtroom held its collective breath as Maurice paused, the magnitude of the moment crystallizing within those hallowed walls. I urge this community, this city, to take these lessons beyond these walls, into policy, into practice, into everyday interactions. We cannot allow our need for justice to be satisfied here alone. It must grow, breathe, it must inspire. The verdict, delivered in precise language expected of the judiciary, found the officers accountable, the weight of their actions no longer cloaked but laid bare and unadorned. Gasps and murmurs erupted, relief, disappointment, solace, a chorus of reactions manifest in a harmony unique to justice served. As the gavel fell, marking the trial's end, a new beginning emerged from its echoes, a pledge sealed within the hearts and minds of all who had witnessed its unfolding. The community, galvanized, prepared to carry forward the torch of change, each step moving it from the courtroom into the streets, where life unfolded in its myriad challenges and triumphs. Maurice stood as the room began to empty, conscious of the legacy forged within those walls. This was but one trial in a journey of many, yet it resounded with the promise of reform, an indelible mark upon the continuum of justice. Courtroom, once more silent, felt alive with future possibility. As Maurice stepped beyond its threshold, he was met by a city ready to embrace the charge. Together they would walk into the future, one carved with commitment, built on justice's foundations, and illuminated by the hope of a society transformed. The courtroom buzzed with the aftermath of the verdict as people filed out, carrying with them the gravity of what had transpired. The air was thick with reflections, conversations echoing off the marble floors and carrying into the streets, where crowds still lingered, waiting to hear the final pronouncements of justice. Maurice Jordan remained seated for a moment longer, watching the ebb and flow of humanity in and out of the courtroom. The room, now slowly emptying, still held a resonant hum, a tangible reminder that justice, while pronounced within these walls, required stewardship beyond them. As silence settled over the benches, Maurice prepared himself for the final act of this profound saga. He'd waited for this moment, a chance to ensure that the impact of the case extended beyond the confines of legal proceedings, permeating the broader community in meaningful ways. Outside, reporters gathered, microphones poised, cameras ready to capture reactions from the key players in this transformative trial. Friends, family, and supporters of both the accused and accusers gathered in clusters, their expressions a mixture of relief, contemplation, and dread for what lay ahead. Maurice emerged into this tableau, his presence commanding yet humble, an embodiment of the values the trial sought to uphold. As he stood at the top of the courthouse stairs, a hush fell over the crowd, anticipation rippling through the throng like a live current. Facing the journalists and the broader public, Maurice addressed them with a voice infused with clarity and purpose. Today, the verdict brings closure to a significant chapter, but it is not the culmination of our community's journey toward fairness and equality. It is merely a stepping stone towards a more just society. His words resonated, rising above the usual cacophony until they settled deeply within the hearts of those gathered. The crowd felt the weight of his message, a powerful acknowledgement that justice was a living, breathing process requiring constant vigilance and action. "We have acknowledged where we have fallen short," Maurice continued, his gaze sweeping over those who had come to witness this historical moment. "Now, it is our duty to rise to the opportunity for change, holding ourselves and our institutions accountable, learning from what was revealed throughout this trial." The media captured every moment, translating his pledge into broadcasts that would reach far beyond the city limits. Conversation flourished, and the air was alive with the invigorated chatter of a community engaged. From within the crowd, Angela Chang stepped forward, joining Maurice at the forefront. a symbol of unity between the judiciary and the community. Her presence, alongside Maurice's, was a testament to the coalition of voices demanding progress. She took the mic, her voice echoing Maurice's commitment. This trial highlighted the work we all must continue. It is indicative of the broader social justice movement that calls upon each of us to take action. Reform is not just a notion, it is a necessity. Together, Maurice and Angela represented the dual power of legal authority and grassroots advocacy, a unified front signaling the dawning reality of systemic change. As they spoke, others began to join them, victims turned advocates. Once voiceless citizens, now emboldened by the public discourse that Maurice's trial had invoked. Their stories intermixed with the broader narrative, painting a picture vibrant with diversity and shared goals. Maurice looked out at the crowd, the past weeks playing out in his mind like a meticulously crafted tapestry. He saw Nathan Dean standing among the assembly, a nod exchanged between them, a silent recognition of the redemption and responsibility embraced. We won't just let this trial define us by what was wrong, but by what we make right, Maurice affirmed, drawing the crowd into his promise. Let's seize the responsibility to transform our future, and in so doing, create a standard of justice robust enough to sustain us all. With this rallying call, the crowd erupted into applause, a collective cheer embodying resolve and renewed momentum. The crowd began to disperse, their spirits lifted, conversations carrying the energy of newly planted seeds of action. The dialogue, amplified by Maurice and Angela, rippled outward into homes, onto streets, into policy discussions. Each person leaving informed by both justice and burdens and its incredible potential. Amidst the throng, Maurice stepped back to watch them file away, mindful that while the trial had reached its conclusion, the reverberations of what they had accomplished together were only beginning. The city had been awakened, its people stirred by the ardor of justice, not as a mere concept, but as a communal undertaking. This was their new path forward, lit by the courage of many who had dared to speak, truth by truth, into the tumult, and bring forth a harmony learned, earned, and cherished. Maurice's heart swelled with the knowledge that this chapter, although closed, was simply an introduction to a greater opus of justice yet to be composed. Together, with allies in every facet of life, they were preparing to embrace the challenge, to write the future, not with ink, but with action, with solidarity, and with an unwavering belief in the possible and the right. The city was slowly awakening, its familiar rhythms altered by the reverberations of the trial. In neighborhoods once bound by the silence of unspoken injustices, conversations now flowed openly, an unguarded exchange of fears, hopes, and newfound aspirations. The trial had ignited a spark, its flames reaching into the deepest corners of the community. As the aftermath of the verdict continued to make waves, Maurice Jordan took a rare moment of respite in a nearby park, its green spaces offering a momentary refuge from the cacophony of public life. Here, beneath the canopy of trees, he could reflect on the journey and the path that still lay ahead. The air was filled with the sounds of life resuming, children playing, birds chattering in the branches overhead. It was a serene contrast to the intensity of the courtroom. Yet, even here, the impact of the trial was evident. Groups gathered on benches and picnicked on the grass, their whispers and gestures animated by the energy of recent events. As Maurice sat, a familiar face approached, a community leader he'd come to know well over the course of the trial, Clara Simmons, a formidable presence both in stature and resolve, had been a pivotal voice in galvanizing local activism and fostering dialogue across divides. "Judge Jordan," she greeted, her voice rich with both admiration and familiarity. "It's good to see you outside the confines of those courthouse walls." Maurice smiled, rising to shake her hand, grateful for the connection they'd forged amidst the tumult. "Clara, it's a pleasure. I've been meaning to thank you for the incredible work you and your team have done, supporting this community through everything." She nodded, her expression one of tempered optimism. "We've come a long way, but there's still much to do. Your leadership has been instrumental in setting the tone for what comes next." Their conversation flowed, an easy dialogue between two advocates for progress. Clara recounted stories of neighbors who'd found strength in unity, their voices once tentative now fiercely engaged in the pursuit of equality and reform. "The trial opened eyes," Clara observed, her gaze sweeping across the park's microcosm of community life. "People are ready to keep pushing forward, to hold each other and our leaders accountable." Maurice listened, appreciating the urgency in her words, recognizing that the trial's legacy depended heavily on sustained action and vigilant advocacy. "We need to channel this momentum into concrete outcomes," he agreed. "It's not just about what happens in court, but in classrooms, city halls, and every space where change is debated and enacted." Their discussion was interrupted by a gathering a few yards away, an impromptu assembly of local youths and mentors engaged in dialogue. Maurice watched with intrigue as they shared stories, debated ideas, and drafted plans for initiatives aimed at fostering inclusivity and eroding biases entrenched in their institution. Clara followed his gaze, pride evident in her voice. "They're the next generation leading the charge. We've been organizing workshops and forums to empower them with the tools they need to sustain this fight long after we're gone." Maurice felt a warmth spread through him, a realization that what they'd ignited within the courtroom was blossoming into a movement that transcended limits. It was both testament and tribute to the unyielded spirit of a community ready to embrace the future. "Let's continue this work together," Maurice proposed, envisioning a partnership that united judicial influence with grassroots activism. "There's so much potential here, and it's our responsibility to nurture it." Clara agreed, her handshake sealing their commitment to collaboration. "Together we can drive those conversations and ensure they transform into action." As they parted ways, Maurice remained seated, watching the tapestry of life unfold around him, interwoven threads of laughter, debate, new beginnings. He realized the city itself had become a classroom, an incubator where ideas evolved rapidly, fueled by collective experience and shared resilience. The trial had been a catalyst, but the chapters that followed promised narratives rich with possibility. Maurice would continue to play his role, a steward of justice, a connector of voices, a believer in the profound impact of everyday decisions. He'd committed not just to presiding over cases, but to fostering the environments where justice could thrive, where each individual's journey could contribute to the broader arc toward equality. As the sun dipped lower, casting the park in golden light, Maurice stood, inspired by the faithful rhythm of life humming with intention. He knew the path they'd chosen was not without obstacles, but it was buoyed by the undeniable force of a community reawakened to its promise. And so he walked back toward the city, where the echo of the trial continued to pulse, shaping futures no longer constrained by injustice. A clarion call for an inclusive society in which each step forward became part of the resonant symphony of change. The echoes of the trial continued to reverberate through the city as Maurice Jordan returned to his chambers, finding solace in the familiar sanctuary of his office. It was here, surrounded by the quiet strength of law books and personal mementos of his journey, that he took a moment to reflect on the profound impact and the personal toll of recent events. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across his desk, illuminating the documents that lay before him, a testament to the work still required, the reforms to be cemented into policy and practice. Yet what weighed heaviest on his mind was not just the legal implications, but the emotional and psychological burdens borne by those affected. His thoughts drifted to all those who had come forward during the trial, their courage laying bare painful truths, yet igniting a collective call for change. Many had shared profound distress, recounting experiences that mirrored struggles Maurice himself knew intimately, laying bare wounds not easily healed. He pondered the personal cost of championing justice, aware that the pursuit sometimes demanded sacrifices greater than anticipated: time, privacy, the veneer of detachment often required in his role. Just as he began to organize his thoughts, the soft knock at his door roused him from his reverie. Camille stood there, her presence a soothing balm amid the storms of public life. She entered the room, bringing with her the warmth of shared history and unwavering support. "Hey, you," she greeted gently, crossing the room to where Morris sat. Her eyes, ever perceptive, took in the tiredness lining his face, the shadows beneath eyes usually bright with determination. Maurice rose, meeting her embrace with gratitude. "I wasn't expecting you today," he admitted, allowing himself a rare moment of vulnerability within the safe confines of her presence. "I thought I'd come by, see how you're holding up," Camille replied, her voice imbued with understanding. "You've been carrying a lot, Maurice. I just wanted you to know you're not alone in this." They settled into the leather chairs near the window, the city's muted hum a distant echo beyond glass panes. Together, they shared the silence, a comfortable pause before words flowed once more, an exchange woven from intimacy and the shared weight of a legacy crafted together. "This trial has been monumental," Maurice remarked, his voice imbued with a blend of pride and introspection. "But I worry, Camille. How do we ensure this translates into real, lasting change?" Camille nodded, aware of the complexity inherent in his queries. "Change is a journey, love. It happens in leaps and bounds, in whispers and shouts, in actions taken every day by people inspired by what you've helped start." She paused, squeezing his hand gently, grounding him with her presence. "It's not just about the systems, but also about the lives, the individual tales that need healing. Your role, our story, it's part of that bigger tapestry, Maurice. What you're doing matters deeply, even if it doesn't always look like the victory you imagined." Maurice absorbed her words, letting them settle into the crevices of his resolve, a reminder that his work was both a foundation and a signpost for those who would come after, drawn by witness and wisdom. "I know you're right," he agreed softly, his heart buoyed by the truth in her affirmations. "Sometimes it's easy to get caught up in the magnitude of it all, wondering if what I'm doing truly makes a difference." Camille smiled, a radiant warmth that illuminated the room. "It does. It always has." For a while longer, they spoke about the future, about their family, about the city's pulse now fueled by renewed activism, and the countless young lives determined to attain the justice they'd been denied for far too long. Their conversation drifted into the familiar grounding that only family can provide, the bond that remained unshakable despite shifting tides around them. As evening shadows lengthened into night, Boris felt the purifying clarity that emerged from honest dialogue, an understanding that even heroes need anchors, reminders, that the battles next undertaken were firmly woven into the foundation of love and unity. When Camille finally rose to leave, Maurice accompanied her to the door, their parting embrace a testament to the strength shared between them, strength that would carry him forward into the work to come. Returning to his desk, Maurice surveyed the documents awaiting attention, understanding that the legal and the personal intricacies of justice were intrinsically linked, each reliant upon the other for substance and transformation. Sitting down once more, he picked up his pen, his tool with which to shape policy, transform perceptions, and etch justice's refrain into the annals of history. Here, in the quiet sanctuary of his office, at the confluence of his many roles, he prepared anew to shepherd transformation through every judgment, every decision, every solemn pledge to the citizens he served. It was there, alone but inspired, that Maurice reaffirmed his vow to advance the law not merely as a system, but as a living promise to each person seeking its refuge. Justice was a river, and Maurice, deeply committed, would ensure its course ran true. As the evening descended upon the city, its glow cast a serene hue over the skyline. Maurice Jordan stood at his office window, the reflection of city lights mirrored in his weary yet hopeful eyes. He watched as life flowed like a river through the streets below, a testament to a community stirred to action, their energies palpable and inspiring. This trial, now a pivotal chapter turned, had ignited a fervor for change that was evident in every corner of the city. Yet, amid the tumult and triumph, lay the quiet introspection Maurice often found himself retreating to, the questions of what lay beyond the tangible outcomes of this courtroom saga. Seated at his desk, he allowed himself a moment of reflection, considering the intricate web of narratives that intertwined to create the tapestry of justice. The voices of those who courageously stood against prejudice echoed in his mind, their truths weaving through the legacy he so fervently endeavored to magnify. In the heart of the city, just beyond his window, community initiatives were blooming. Meetings convened in public libraries and community centers, drawing attendees from every background. Each person invested in nurturing the seeds of reform sown during the trial. The city was changing, a metamorphosis taking unfurling where words had once faltered, replaced by united actions and indelible bonds forged in shared purpose. But even as the world outside rallied around new beginnings, Maurice contemplated the subtler threads, the personal transformations born from this collective journey. In his mind, the quiet moments surfaced, conversations held in corridors, the weight of unspoken understandings exchanged between nods and glances, gestures of solidarity backward in their simplicity yet forward in intent. Maurice knew the impact of a single action reverberated beyond its origin, its echoes resounding in the lives it touched, influencing legacies both personal and communal. This awareness brought him back to his own motivations, a call to justice not purely out of duty, but a profound recognition of shared humanity, a desire to shape a world where his children and theirs could thrive without fear or prejudice. His thoughts turned to Joshua and Maya, imagining futures for them unbounded by the strictures that had constrained so many before. Their innocence and curiosity fueled his drive, reminders of why this labor, burdensome at times, was a necessary undertaking. Maurice closed his eyes momentarily, breathing deeply, allowing hope to settle alongside the responsibility he bore. He envisioned a city where empathy guided policy, where inclusivity was intuitive rather than aspirational, a place where the legacy of this trial led not only to justice but to genuine reconciliation. As he opened his eyes again, clarity emerged, a realization that justice isn't defined by singular victories, but by continuity, sustained by individuals who take up its banner with conviction and courage. It was a living entity, leaving its mark on hearts and minds, a beacon unyielded even amidst the darkest nights. With a renewed spirit, Maurice returned to his desk, the weight of his mantle apparent but not unwelcome. The documents before him awaited roads for potential changes mapped in each line, outcomes poised to shape the narrative in ways yet untold. A quiet resolve took root. He would carry forward the stories entrusted to him, the truths and aspirations, leading with dignity and steadfast commitment to equity. As the city's heartbeat pulsed beneath his windows, Maurice signed off for the day. He rose, gathering his belongings, preparing to step once more into the world outside, a world renewed by the promise of transformation, carried forward on the unshakable foundation that justice imparted. On the eve of a new chapter, Maurice paused before leaving the comfort of his office, the profound understanding that this journey of struggle, triumph, and tenacity was far from over. Today's efforts would echo through time, challenging the complacency of tomorrow, ensuring that those who came after could feel the resonance of justice and know deep within their souls that they too were stewards of its everlasting promise. As he shut the door behind him, a whispered resolve encapsulated the journey yet ahead. The story of justice is written by us all. Will you take up the pen? Would you like to see more stories that illuminate the path to fairness and hope? Share, like, and subscribe to stay engaged with the narratives that shape our world.